Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 66 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is dreaming big. Our quote of the day comes to us from Walt Disney. All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. I'm very excited to bring you today's podcast all the way from Slovenia. I think you'll really enjoy today's episode as our guest provides us with some great advice. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Tim Fargo. Tim, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Chris, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask is, are you ready to make it happen today?
I am ready to make it happen, as a matter of fact.
That is good news. And I need to add for our listeners full and fair disclosure. We are doing this podcast live. I am in Greenwich, Connecticut, and Tim is in Slovenia.
I am in Slovenia. I am in Ljubljana.
So I need to share that this is the first. Would it be Slovenic podcast? Is that the proper pronunciation?
Yeah.
There we go.
Slovenian. Yeah.
So Tim, I appreciate you spending some time with us. So as I mentioned before we went live, is the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up on themselves or their dreams. And I was curious if you have either a story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and you never quit.
Well, I think probably the best example of this is right after I started Omega, which is an investigative firm. I started in 96 and sold in 2003. Within a matter of months after I sold it, I was sued by my former business partners. And just to frame this for you, I actually was served. You have to be served papers when you get sued. And I was served the lawsuit at a Christmas party that was filled with clients. And I guess the point of this was to freak me out. And to be honest, it did. I mean, inside me, I'm going slightly crazy because one of my former partners was a lawyer, which I knew instantly meant he could grind away on this thing pretty much, money free while I'd be paying someone to defend the lawsuit. And I also know just at that time from having business experience, people think, they watch TV and they think, if you're right that you'll win, but you can run out of money way before you have a chance to do that. So I was super, super concerned, but at the same time, any thought I had of leaving that business at all, because I was struggling a little bit, I had just started this thing. I didn't have much money. I was, having all the classic doubts of somebody who's just getting going, right? It just galvanized me though. And I was really fortunate to get some sage advice, and that was to let my lawyer do his job and focus on running my business. And I can tell you, it'd be easy to be consumed, and not just for people that are listening, you can be easy to be consumed by any problem you face. I mean, this was like a big thing, right? So, you have this thing, it's kind of got you in the headlights, and if you focus on it, you're going to drive off the road, kind of metaphorically. And I'd say that happens to people with problems all the time, where instead of focusing on the thing that's going to save you, which is very often the thing you're trying to go toward, you're going to focus on the thing you're trying to avoid. And in this case, and I think in almost all cases, when there's a problem, unless you happen to be an expert in that area, find somebody to deal with it and stay focused on what you should be doing. And we ground away on that lawsuit for well over a year, and ran up. It's not huge money. I think we spent $40,000, but to this day, I don't know where we managed to scratch that money together because we didn't have it. But we did prevail. But it took a lot of there were a lot of moments, but we got through it and came out the other side.
You mentioned some really interesting points, and I just want to commend you for getting through it and focusing on what you could do. And you mentioned something that really stood out is you got your lawyer, and he or she focused on what they were doing and their job, and you focused on the other thing. And I think when there are lawsuits and getting served and things like that, and some of our listeners hopefully won't ever get served, and some of them probably know what it is to be served. And it's really a daunting task, and it can really knock you, and especially when you get served by somebody that you know, like, or trust, and or have a relationship with in the past. And I think what that can do is it can really throw you for a loop, and I think at that point you can do one of two things. It can bend you or break you, and for you it clearly bent you, and you kept on going and led you out the other side. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Oh, no, my pleasure. I do. I think, these kind of messages are super important because it's so easy for people to think that, you're going to get killed off by something like that. And the reality is you're so often you're bigger than the problem. I mean, in retrospect, it wasn't really that big a deal. I mean, yeah, we struggled with the paying and everything, but it really wasn't nearly as cataclysmic as it seemed at the time.
No, and what is the saying? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger?
Correct.
Obviously, it made you stronger. So, speaking of quotes, one of the things we do in every episode is we utilize a quote. I was curious if you have a favorite quote.
I do quotes on @AlphabetSuccess, which is my Twitter handle, and not only do I do quotes there, I have been doing for nearly half a year now. I do a video quote every morning, and yesterday's was, if you want something different, you have to do something different, and I really love that because one of the things that it brings forward to me is, and I really, for whatever it's worth, I hate the message of hustle, hustle, hustle. You got to work, work, work. Because, I mean, that advice is okay in a certain context. But look, if hard work was what saved the day, the people that were manual laborers would be the most richly rewarded people in the world because they probably work harder than any of us. The reality is, if you're not doing something that makes a difference, if you're not focusing your effort on something that's going to change things, for other people and like improve their lives, and you haven't found something that's delivering value to other people, it doesn't matter how hard your work, because you may be digging a hole to fill up another one you dug 5 minutes ago. So, I mean, that may be a definition of progress in somebody's mind, but not in mine. So I think getting people to realize that, if you're wanting to change your life, and you're already working 12-hour days, adding 2 more hours isn't going to be the thing that's going to put you, across the goal line and like change your life. Usually it's that you're not working at the right thing.
No, I like that. And I do like that quote is, if you want something different, you have to do something different. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Michael Jordan, I'm a big basketball guy, has a quote, and I'm going to blotch it here, so I don't want to be taken verbatim. But what he talks about is there's a difference of practicing versus actually being productive when you practice. And he talked about in an interview, you go out and spend 2 hours in a gym kind of just shooting the ball and dribbling and messing around. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the practice session, it's 2 hours. But as opposed to going in the gym for an hour or an hour and 10 minutes and being focused on, I'm working on my jump shot and I got to work on my crossover and really spend the committed time. And I think your point that you bring up of someone working 12 hours a day and then just adding 2 more hours, that doesn't mean that you're going to be successful, because you need to be working on and doing the right things.
Absolutely. And to stay with the basketball thing, because my daughter is a big basketball player. I mean, she's actually in the process of trying to play college ball. And one of the things I talked to her about, she's been working on like her threes as an example. And her threes are decent, but she actually struggles a bit from the foul line. And I'm like, you should spend an hour a day working on your foul shot, because it's, when you have a weak spot, especially something like that, people will take the foul, right? I mean, like they did with Shaq back in the day. So And exactly that point. Here's something where you can clearly change something through a focused effort that will elevate your game, right? You could go and do what Jordan said. You could go and just goof around and shoot, and you probably marginally improve in some way. But if you can spot something specific that will change the way you play and focus in on that, then when you leave practice, by the end of like a month or two, you actually have changed as a player because you focused in on something that actually matters.
When I get to talk about business and not quitting, and then you get to add basketball, and that's just a passion for me. So we'll talk offline because I played college basketball and coached college basketball for a couple of years. So we'll definitely talk offline.
Oh, cool.
So as we are always looking to provide value, and something we talk about is calls to action, I was curious if you have a specific morning or daily ritual that you can attribute some of your personal as well as your professional success to.
It's going to sound probably like, and I'm a tech guy, right? I actually run a technology business, but for exactly what you just asked about, my daily thing is to take out my paper list and see what's on it, like add to it if need be, and then prioritize it. And it's a great segue from what we were just talking about, because from day to day, there's some things that are bigger projects that don't kind of go away overnight, but I always have that list. And then there's things like, things that are emergencies that need to be dealt with. So they jump to the top of the list. But I try to take every day and make sure that what I'm working on are the most important things for that day, that I'm not just grinding through kind of a mindless routine.
Now, is that something that you've always done, or did you learn that somewhere, or how did that come about?
I actually started organizing my life that way in college, because I found it was super easy to like go off in a million directions, and that's a little bit my personality anyhow, is I can be very distracted. So by having that, I found it tied me back to the things I needed to be most concerned about. So like, if I had an exam in 2 days, and I didn't have it, I had clearance, lots of runway on other things I needed to do, I could dedicate all my time to the upcoming exam and not fiddle around in the margins with other things that I could catch up on later.
Yeah, no, I like that. And prioritizing and working with the list, that's something that a lot of our guests have actually spoken about, whether it's electronic or paper. I myself am a paper guy, but I think some of the most successful people operate from lists, and they focus every day, like you said, on the most important thing. And Jeff Woods, who was a former guest on our podcast, he has his own podcast, The One Thing. And one of the things that, pardon all the one thing terms, but one of the things that he focuses on every single day is do what is the most important thing. And I think personally, it's something that I've been working on, and we talk a lot about on our show, is you need to focus on and prioritize what the most important thing. And unfortunately, a lot of times, the most important thing sometimes is the biggest and the most daunting. So that's always an interesting aspect in that regard.
Absolutely. And, something I find, if I have something I need to work on and I start finding little projects to do instead of it, then I know for sure I need to work on it. Like, if I start going, maybe I ought to clean the kitchen a little bit. I'm like, wow, this is something that just like freaking you out a little bit. So you better work on it. I don't know if you know what I mean, but sometimes if I have something really big to do and I know it's going to take a little bit above average elbow grease, I'll start dreaming up other things to insert in front of it.
I can agree with that big time. Every time when I was in middle school and high school and I needed to sit down and study for exams, I would clean my room, reorganize. I would literally come up with anything and everything other than studying.
Yeah, so I catch myself, and if I catch myself doing it, I'm like, you so totally do not need to clean your kitchen. Yeah, get to work.
Yeah, and that's so. And the list of priorities, cleaning your kitchen probably is not number one on that list.
Yeah, when you talk about making a difference, clean kitchen, nice to have, probably not transformative.
No, and it's probably not going to make or break that day for you either.
No.
So I wanted to ask you, Tim, if you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Wow. Well, the problem would be my 20-year-old version of myself wouldn't listen to me.
All right, well, we'll add an asterisk to that. Assuming that the 20-year-old version would listen, what would the advice be?
A receptive version of myself. I would say don't waste time on small ideas. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, which at the time was a fading industrial town. Unemployment was about 20%. And, my dreams were really, really, meager, meager. I wanted to just be a union dock work, like work on loading docks. Right. But I didn't have that point of reference. And I think you can be busy doing something great with your life, or you can be busy, sweeping the floor of a warehouse, and you just have to make up your mind what you want to do. So I would dream big, because you got to spend time doing something. So spend time doing something big.
Spend time doing something big. I like that. Now here's a different spin of a question. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Probably Mark Twain, just because I think he was extremely funny.
We've now recorded in our 50s, and that's the first time that Mark Twain has been mentioned for that question. In addition to him being funny, anything else specifically that stands out why you would like to have dinner with him?
I think he was just a great observer of human behavior. Which is true of anyone who's a particularly good humorist. Because humor is based on truth, right? And truth and sort of very insightful observation tends to be what makes for a great kind of comic. And I think he was somebody who really watched and understood people. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I think he was a very amusing guy, and I didn't think about it in advance, and I probably could have given you a more, sort of lofty sounding answer, but I'd love to sit down with Twain. It'd be a blast.
No, there's no rhyme or reason. It's kind of on the spot thinking. So I'm glad you mentioned him. And for me, it's always interesting and intriguing to get different people's perspectives. And this is the first time that Mark Twain has been one of the answers. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So I wanted to ask you if there's anything else exciting that you'd like to talk about, or something that you're working on that you'd like to tell our listeners.
Well, I continue to work on Social Jukebox, which is an automated posting system for social media. We post to Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And it's an accidental business. I started this about 2 years ago. I was trying to promote my own book, and I got super sick of scheduling posts. And I had somebody build the software system for me, just for me. I didn't have any intention of starting a business. I just wanted to try to sell my book. And then over time, it became pretty obvious to me that people were much more interested in the software I was using than they were in the book I'd written. So this is one of those things that's also a good tip. If you're in business, sometimes there's an accidental business in the middle of what you're doing, and that's what happened to me. Completely thought I'm just going to be focus on being an author and do some speaking. And it ended up being, the book did okay, but what really happened is I built a software product, and now we've got a couple thousand paid users and about 25,000 free users. And, we continue to grow and try to find ways to innovate that make it easier for people to manage their social media presence, because it's something I think we all need to do. But I think the mechanics of it can be a little daunting if you're actually trying to run a business.
No, I couldn't agree more. The mechanics are daunting, and I think a lot of times people probably fall into the paralysis by analysis mode and just end up not doing it. So speaking of your company, wanted to ask if our listeners are interested in finding out more or following you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, the business is socialjukebox.com, and you can reach me on Twitter at Alphabet Success. And if you've got a question about anything we talked about, if you email me at tim@socialjukebox.com, I'm always happy to try to answer anybody's questions. I don't know. I can't always answer them, but I can try.
I like that. You can't always answer, but you can try. So, wanted to ask you if you have any parting words you'd like to share with our listeners.
If you're thinking about doing something, just try it. The one thing I probably see more than anything are people who, you talked about paralysis by analysis, and people who want to read one more book, study one more thing, do one more iteration. Look, before I started my business, the software business, I didn't know diddly squat about the software business. And every day I figure out something new. And some days I look back at what I did and I went, wow, that was pretty boneheaded. But you know what? You learn by doing. So don't sit and wait for the right moment, because that moment just doesn't exist. Just start doing it. And before you know it, you'll be dancing across the dance floor.
That's some great advice, and that's one of the things we talk about is having the best content or great content, but taking no action is meaningless. So even if you have mediocre content, but you take massive amounts of action, you're going to be successful. So hopefully our listeners would take you up on that. Listen, Tim, I can't thank you enough, not only for your time, as well as doing and being on the first podcast that we've done across the world. So I appreciate your time, your insight, and we'll put all those notes and the resources in our show notes for our listeners that would like to connect with you. But thank you so much for your time.
Chris, thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope everyone gets something out of it.
To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, Dreaming Big, Tim provided us with some great stuff. Tim discussed how being served by a former business partner led to him focusing on his business and becoming the best version of himself. Tim shared a very simple yet profound piece of advice. If we want something different, we have to do something different. He also semi-warned us not to waste our time on small ideas, but to dream big. In his closing remarks, he left us with something I think we should all consider. Tim mentioned that if we are thinking about doing something, we should just try it. And he mentioned how we learn by doing. So our call today is a very simple question. What are you thinking about doing, and what is your big dream? If the worst thing we can experience by trying is failing, then why not? What if we don't fail? What if we exceed beyond our wild expectations? Whatever you are thinking about or dreaming about, stop. Stop thinking or dreaming and start doing. Just try and go for your greatness.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.